The woman reluctantly returned home after spending a year caring for her dying mother-in-law. As she quietly entered the apartment, she froze upon accidentally overhearing her talking on the phone. Mia pulled her coat tighter. She climbed the stairs to her apartment. The cold evening air bit at her cheeks, but her thoughts were elsewhere. After a quick trip to the pharmacy, she was eager to get back home. Her mother-in-law, Evelyn, relied on her for everything these days. It had been a challenging year since her husband's passing, but Evelyn's health had steadily declined, and Mia had taken on the role of caregiver. As she reached the door, she paused, fumbling with her keys. From inside, she heard a faint voice. Evelyn was talking, her usually feeble tone now steady and clear. Mia's brow furrowed. She hadn't expected Evelyn to be awake, let alone speaking with such vigor. Carefully, Mia pushed the door open. The living room light was dim, casting soft shadows over the worn furniture. Evelyn sat in her usual spot on the recliner, phone cradled against her ear. "Yes," Evelyn said, her voice firm. "It's all been arranged." "She has no idea." Mia froze, her hand still on the doorknob. The words hung in the air, sharp and cryptic. She stood motionless, her heart pounding as she strained to catch more of the conversation. "Tomorrow should be fine. I'll make sure she's out of the way," Evelyn continued, a slight chuckle escaping her lips. "Yes, everything will be ready by then." Mia's mind raced. Who was Evelyn talking to? And what was she planning? She knew her mother-in-law could be secretive, but this was different, deliberate, almost conspiratorial. As if sensing her presence, Evelyn suddenly turned her head. Her eyes met Mia's, and for a brief moment, there was a flicker of something. Surprise? Guilt? It was gone as quickly as it appeared. "Mia, you're back," Evelyn said, her voice softer now, almost as if nothing had happened. She covered the mouthpiece of the phone. "Did you get the medication?" Mia hesitated, her eyes narrowing. "Who were you talking to?" Evelyn's expression remained calm. "Oh, just an old friend. We were catching up." She offered a faint smile. "Come in, dear. It's cold out there." Mia stepped inside, her gaze never leaving Evelyn. The conversation she overheard replayed in her mind, each word raising more questions. She nodded slowly, placing the pharmacy bag on the kitchen counter. "I'll make some tea," Mia said, her tone casual despite the storm brewing in her thoughts. As she moved toward the kitchen, her eyes drifted back to Evelyn. The older woman was already dialing another number, her back turned to Mia, as if dismissing her concerns entirely. The next morning, the apartment stirred to life as the faint aroma of brewed coffee mingled with the morning light. Evelyn, already seated at the kitchen table, was thumbing through a newspaper. She looked frail but oddly composed, her pale skin illuminated by the soft glow filtering through the window. Mia observed her from the doorway, still uneasy from the previous night's events. Evelyn seemed entirely unfazed, as though the cryptic phone call had never happened. She sipped her tea, her hand steady despite her usual weakness. This calm exterior contrasted sharply with the Evelyn Mia had known, a woman often plagued by coughs and fatigue, requiring constant attention. "You're up early," Mia said, breaking the silence as she moved to pour herself a cup of coffee. Evelyn glanced up, her expression neutral. "Couldn't sleep much," she replied. "Thought I'd get a head start on the day." Mia sat across from her, trying to suppress the myriad of questions swirling in her mind. Instead, she decided to tread carefully. "You seemed to have quite the conversation last night." Evelyn's eyes flickered briefly before she returned her attention to the newspaper. "Oh, that? Just catching up with an old friend. It's been ages since we talked." Mia nodded but didn't press further. She knew Evelyn wasn't telling the whole truth, and pressing her now might only lead to more evasions. Instead, she decided to observe, hoping the answers would reveal themselves in time. The day passed in a routine fashion. Mia busied herself with household chores, occasionally checking in on Evelyn, who spent most of her time resting in the living room. Yet, even amidst the mundane, Mia couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. In the afternoon, Evelyn's doctor, Dr. Harris, made his usual house call. He was a kind man in his early 60s, with a gentle demeanor that always seemed to put Evelyn at ease. He checked her vitals, engaging her in light conversation, while Mia watched from the corner of the room. "Well, your vitals are stable," Dr. Harris said, scribbling notes onto his clipboard. "But you still need plenty of rest, Evelyn. No overexerting yourself." Evelyn nodded, her smile polite but distant. "Of course, doctor. I'll be careful." As Dr. Harris packed his things, Mia walked him to the door. "Doctor, can I ask you something?" she said in a hushed tone. Dr. Harris paused, his brow furrowing slightly. "Of course. What's on your mind? Have you noticed anything unusual about Evelyn lately?" Mia hesitated, unsure how to phrase her concern without sounding paranoid. "She seems different. Stronger, somehow." Dr. Harris considered this for a moment. It's not uncommon for patients to have periods of seeming improvement, especially when they're managing their symptoms well. "But I'll admit, Evelyn does seem more energetic than usual. Keep an eye on her, and let me know if anything changes." Mia nodded, thanking him before closing the door. His words did little to ease her suspicions. Later that evening, as they sat down for dinner, Mia decided to probe further. "Evelyn, you've been doing a lot better lately," she said, her tone light but inquisitive. "It's good to see you with more energy." Evelyn smiled, her eyes twinkling with a hint of mischief. "Perhaps I'm just determined to make the most of my time," she said, her voice carrying a cryptic undertone. Mia didn't respond, choosing instead to observe her mother-in-law carefully. Evelyn's sudden improvement, the mysterious phone calls, and her overall behavior were beginning to form a puzzle that Mia was determined to solve. After dinner, Evelyn retired early, leaving Mia alone in the quiet apartment. She sat on a couch, staring at the old rotary phone on the side table. Her fingers hovered over the dial as she contemplated calling the last number Evelyn had contacted. But before she could act, a soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Startled, Mia opened the door to find a man in his late 40s standing there. He was sharply dressed, his dark suit tailored to perfection, and his eyes held an air of authority. "Good evening," the man said, his voice smooth. "I'm here to see Evelyn." Mia hesitated, her heart pounding. "Who are you?" The man offered a polite smile. "Just an old acquaintance." "She's expecting me." Mia stepped aside, letting him in, her mind racing with questions. As the man entered, Evelyn appeared in the hallway, her expression unreadable. "Right on time," Evelyn said, her tone oddly formal. "Thank you for coming." Mia watched in silence as Evelyn led the man to the living room, closing the door behind them. She stood frozen, the sense of unease deepening. What was Evelyn hiding? And who was this man? Mia paced the hallway, her mind racing. Who was this man? And why had Evelyn kept his visit a secret? She strained to hear their conversation through the closed living room door, but could only catch fragments. "Everything is on schedule," the man's voice said, low but firm. Evelyn's reply was softer, but Mia could make out the words. "It's better this way." Mia's frustration boiled over. The secrecy, the cryptic conversations, none of it made sense. Deciding she couldn't take the suspense any longer, she knocked lightly on the door. A beat of silence passed before Evelyn's voice called out, calm and composed. "Come in, Mia." When Mia entered, both Evelyn and the man looked unperturbed, as though they had been expecting her. The man rose from his seat, extending a hand. "You must be Mia." "I'm Victor." Mia shook his hand reluctantly, her gaze flicking between him and Evelyn. "Nice to meet you," she said tersely. "I didn't know we were expecting company." Victor offered a polite smile. "I was just leaving," he said smoothly. He turned back to Evelyn. "We'll finalize everything tomorrow." Evelyn nodded, her expression unreadable. "Thank you, Victor. I appreciate your help." With that, Victor exited, leaving Mia alone with Evelyn. The tension in the room was palpable. Mia crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing. Who is he, and what's going on? Evelyn sighed, leaning back in her chair. "Victor is an old family friend. He's helping me with some personal matters." Mia frowned. "What kind of personal matters?" Evelyn met her gaze, her eyes steady. "It's nothing for you to worry about, Mia. Trust me." But trust was the last thing on Mia's mind. "You've been keeping secrets, Evelyn. I heard you on the phone last night, and now this. What are you planning?" Evelyn's lips pressed into a thin line. For a moment, it seemed like she might deny everything, but then her expression softened. "Mia, everything I'm doing is for your benefit. You've sacrificed so much, and I want to make sure you're taken care of." Mia blinked, taken aback. "What are you talking about?" Evelyn sighed deeply, her hands clasping tightly in her lap. "Mark's death left us both with a lot to manage. I've been working on something to secure our future, your future." Mia's heart ached at the mention of her late husband. She missed him every day, and the weight of his absence had only grown heavier over the past year. Still, Evelyn's vague explanations did little to ease her mind. That doesn't explain why you're being so secretive, Mia said, her voice cracking slightly. Why not just tell me what's going on? Evelyn hesitated, her gaze dropping to her hands. Because it's complicated, and I didn't want to burden you. Mia shook her head. You're not protecting me, Evelyn. You're shutting me out. Evelyn looked up, her eyes filled with an emotion Mia couldn't quite place. Regret? Fear? I promise, Mia, you'll understand soon. Frustrated and emotionally drained, Mia stood. I hope so, she said quietly before leaving the room. The next day, the tension between them lingered. Evelyn remained tight-lipped, and Mia felt like a stranger in her own home. She busied herself with errands, hoping the distance would clear her mind, but the mystery gnawed at her. That evening, just as Mia returned home, she found Victor at the door again. This time, he carried a briefcase, his demeanor as polished as ever. Mia's stomach churned. Back so soon, she asked, forcing a smile. Victor nodded. Evelyn and I have some final arrangements to discuss. Mia watched as he entered, her unease growing. She followed him to the living room, determined not to be excluded this time. If this concerns Evelyn's future, I deserve to know, she said firmly. Evelyn glanced at Victor, who gave her a subtle nod. Evelyn sighed, motioning for Mia to sit. Very well. You've been patient, and I suppose it's time you knew. Victor opened his briefcase, pulling out a stack of documents. Evelyn has been working to transfer all her assets into a trust, he explained. She wants to ensure that you're financially secure, no matter what happens. Mia's eyes widened. A trust? Evelyn, why didn't you tell me? Evelyn's gaze softened. Because I didn't want you to worry. I wanted to make sure everything was in place before I explained. Mia scanned the documents, her hands trembling. The trust was comprehensive, covering everything from the apartment to a sizable savings account. This is incredible, she murmured. Victor spoke again, his tone gentle. Evelyn cares deeply about you, Mia. This is her way of ensuring your future. Mia looked at Evelyn, her heart swelling with a mix of gratitude and guilt. She had been so consumed by suspicion that she hadn't considered Evelyn's true intentions. Thank you, she said softly. I don't know what to say. Evelyn reached out, taking Mia's hand. Just promise me you'll live your life fully, Mia. That's all I want. The days following the revelation of the trust were a whirlwind. Mia tried to convince herself that everything was under control, but a nagging doubt lingered. Victor's charm and professionalism felt too smooth, too rehearsed. Evelyn, on the other hand, seemed more relaxed, trusting that her plan was in capable hands. One afternoon, while Evelyn napped, Mia sat in the living room, the stack of trust documents spread out on the coffee table. She reread them carefully, searching for anything that seemed out of place. Her legal knowledge was limited, but the language felt deliberately dense. Frustrated, she decided to consult someone who could provide clarity. Mia reached out to Sarah, a close friend who worked as a legal assistant. They met the next day at a quiet cafe, where Mia handed Sarah the documents. Sarah flipped through the pages, her brow furrowing deeper with each turn. This clause, Sarah said, tapping the paper. It gives the trustee Victor complete control over the assets once the trust is executed. Evelyn wouldn't be able to reverse it without his consent. Mia's stomach dropped. Are you saying she could lose everything? Sarah nodded grimly. If Victor isn't who he claims to be, yes? He could clean out her accounts, sell the apartment, and there'd be little you could do. Mia felt a wave of nausea. Evelyn thinks she's protecting me. She has no idea she's handing everything over to a potential con artist. Sarah placed a reassuring hand on Mia's arm. You need to act fast. Convince Evelyn to pause the process, and let's dig into Victor's background. That evening, Mia returned home with a renewed sense of urgency. Evelyn was in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared tea. The sight of her mother-in-law, so calm and trusting, made Mia's heart ache. Evelyn, we need to talk, Mia said, her voice firm but gentle. Evelyn turned, her smile fading at Mia's serious tone. What is it, dear? Mia hesitated, then laid the documents on the kitchen table. I had these looked over by a friend. She's in law, and she found something troubling. Victor has too much control over the trust. Evelyn frowned, her hands tightening around her teacup. Mia, I appreciate your concern, but Victor assured me everything was above board. I know you trust him, Mia said carefully, but we need to be sure. Please, let's pause the process until we can verify his credentials. Evelyn's face was a mixture of doubt and stubborn resolve. Mia, I've known Victor for years. He came highly recommended by Mark's business associates. And yet, Mia countered, you never met him until recently. Evelyn, this is everything you've worked for. If we're wrong, no harm done. But if I'm right... Evelyn's eyes softened, the weight of Mia's words sinking in. After a long pause, she nodded. All right, we'll hold off for now. Relief flooded Mia, but she knew their work was just beginning. The next morning, Mia and Sarah began their investigation. With Daniel's help, they dug into Victor's past. It didn't take long for red flags to surface. His name was linked to several dissolved firms, all with a history of fraud allegations. He had no permanent address, and his credentials were unverifiable. Mia shared their findings with Evelyn, who was visibly shaken. How could I have been so blind? Evelyn muttered, her voice thick with regret. It's not your fault, Mia reassured her. He's a professional liar. Determined to expose Victor, they devised a plan. Evelyn reached out to her old friend Margaret, a wealthy widow who had dealt with estate planning. Margaret agreed to pose as a new client to lure Victor into making the same mistakes. With hidden cameras and microphones set up in Margaret's home, they prepared to capture his fraudulent actions on tape. The morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows as Evelyn prepared tea. The tranquility of the moment was shattered when Mia shuffled through the mail and found an envelope marked urgent from Evelyn's bank. Her pulse quickened. Evelyn, Mia called out, holding the envelope aloft. This looks serious. Evelyn, sensing Mia's unease, took the envelope with trembling hands. She opened it carefully, her eyes scanning the contents. Within seconds, her face went pale. No, this can't be right, she whispered. Mia leaned over her shoulder, reading the letter, a notification of account closure and the transfer of all funds, totaling hundreds of thousands of dollars, to an unknown account. The transaction had been executed the previous day. Victor, Mia muttered, her voice filled with anger. Evelyn's hand shook as she clutched the letter. He said the trust would secure everything. I trusted him. Her voice cracked, a mixture of disbelief and despair. Mia immediately grabbed her phone and dialed Daniel, her lawyer friend. Within minutes, they were on a conference call in the living room. Evelyn sat in silence, her hands wringing nervously as Mia explained what had happened. Daniel's voice was steady but grave. I'm sorry, Evelyn. Based on what you've told me, Victor has already executed the trust, which means legally, he now controls your assets. Evelyn gasped. But he said this was to protect my money from Mia. That's the con, Daniel said firmly. He gained your trust and then used it against you. This is fraud, plain and simple. But to reverse it, we'll need solid evidence that he acted with deceit. Mia interjected, her tone sharp. How do we prove that? Daniel paused before continuing. Fraud cases depend heavily on intent. If we can catch Victor admitting to his scheme, we can challenge the legality of the trust and take him to court. Evelyn looked devastated. But how can we do that? He's already taken everything. Mia placed a reassuring hand on Evelyn's shoulder. We'll find a way. We're not letting him get away with this. Later that evening, Mia and Evelyn sat with Daniel in his office, determined to devise a strategy. The atmosphere was tense but focused. Sarah, Daniel's legal assistant, spread out documents on the table, highlighting key points in Victor's fraudulent plan. We know Victor has a pattern, Daniel began, his voice calm but resolute. He targets individuals who trust him, exploits their vulnerabilities, and disappears once he's drained their assets. Evelyn sighed, guilt written across her face. I walked right into his trap. Mia shook her head. This isn't your fault. He's a professional liar. Daniel nodded in agreement. What we need is bait. If we can lure him into thinking he has another easy target, he might incriminate himself. Sarah chimed in, we'll need someone he'd see as a potential client. Someone with assets and just enough naivety to attract his interest. Evelyn's eyes lit up. Margaret, she said suddenly. She's a dear friend of mine, and she's been looking into estate planning. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Would she be willing to help? Evelyn hesitated for a moment before nodding. Margaret would do anything for me, and she despises people who prey on the vulnerable. The next morning, Evelyn met with Margaret to explain the situation. As expected, Margaret was more than willing to assist. "That snake won't know what hit him," she said, her voice brimming with determination. With Margaret on board, Daniel laid out the plan. "We'll arrange a meeting between Victor and Margaret. She'll express interest in setting up a trust and ask pointed questions about asset security." Sarah added, "We'll wire her house with hidden cameras and microphones. The goal is to get Victor talking about his methods, especially anything that reveals his fraudulent intentions." Margaret smirked. "I'll make sure he feels completely at ease." Daniel looked at Evelyn and Mia. "If we can get him to admit his scheme, even subtly, we'll have the evidence we need to challenge the trust in court and restore your assets." Evelyn exhaled deeply, a glimmer of hope returning to her eyes. "Thank you, all of you. I don't know what I'd do without your help." Mia squeezed Evelyn's hand. "We're going to get through this together." With a plan in motion, they braced themselves for the next step, confronting the man who had taken everything from them. The day of the operation arrived with a mixture of tension and determination. Margaret's home was prepared, hidden cameras embedded discreetly in bookshelves, microphones tucked into flower vases, and every angle covered. Daniel and his team monitored the setup from a nearby van, ready to act the moment Victor incriminated himself. Inside the house, Margaret sipped her tea, exuding calm confidence. She had rehearsed her role meticulously, and now all that remained was to lure Victor into revealing his true nature. Victor arrived promptly, as expected. He was dressed impeccably, his briefcase clutched in one hand and an air of authority about him. Margaret greeted him warmly, playing the part of a wealthy widow looking for financial security. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Victor," Margaret said, her voice light and conversational. "I've heard such wonderful things about your work." Victor smiled, his charm on full display. "It's my pleasure, Mrs. Delaney. Ensuring my clients' financial futures is my top priority." Margaret led him to the living room, gesturing toward the document she had prepared as bait. "I've been considering setting up a trust, much like the one you arranged for Evelyn. She speaks so highly of you." Victor's eyes gleamed at the mention of Evelyn, but his expression remained composed. "Evelyn is a dear client, and I'm glad to hear she's pleased. Trusts are an excellent way to safeguard your assets." As they discussed the details, Margaret carefully steered the conversation toward Victor's methods. "I've heard stories about fraudulent advisors," she said, feigning concern. "How do I know I'm in safe hands?" Victor chuckled, waving a hand dismissively. "I understand your worries, but I assure you, I operate with the utmost integrity. My track record speaks for itself." Margaret leaned in slightly, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone. "But surely you've come across situations where clients needed a little creative handling?" Victor hesitated for a fraction of a second before his smile widened. "Let's just say I know how to navigate complex scenarios. Each case is unique, and I tailor my approach to ensure my clients' interests are always prioritized." It was a subtle admission, but was enough to spark suspicion. Margaret pressed further, her tone playful yet probing. "And what about cases where a client might need to reallocate assets discreetly?" "Hypothetically, of course." Victor leaned back, exuding confidence. "Hypothetically, there are ways to manage such situations. It's all about understanding the system and leveraging opportunities." From the surveillance van, Daniel's voice crackled over the headset. "We've got him." Mia sat beside him, her heart pounding. "Is it enough?" Daniel nodded, his eyes glued to the monitor. "He's already hinted at unethical practices. If we can push him just a little further." Inside, Margaret played her final card. She pulled out a fictional portfolio, meticulously crafted by Daniel's team, showing significant assets under her name. "This is what I'm working with," she said, sliding the papers toward Victor. "I want to ensure everything is protected, even if it means bypassing a few conventional methods." Victor's eyes lit up as he examined the documents. His tone became more direct, his guard dropping. "Mrs. Delaney, with my guidance, we can ensure your assets are protected and optimized. Discretion is key, and I specialize in handling sensitive matters without raising any red flags." Margaret smiled, masking her disgust. "That's exactly what I need to hear." As Victor packed up his briefcase, satisfied with a new prospect, Daniel signaled the team. Within moments, they had the footage downloaded and secured. The trap had worked perfectly. Once Victor left, Margaret collapsed onto the couch, letting out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "That man is as slippery as they come." Mia and Evelyn rushed in from the van, relief and determination etched on their faces. You did brilliantly, Margaret, Daniel said, shaking her hand. We've got everything we need. Evelyn hugged Margaret tightly. I don't know how to thank you. You've given me hope. Margaret smiled warmly. Now let's make sure that scoundrel gets what he deserves. The next day, Daniel moved quickly. With incriminating footage in hand, he contacted the authorities, filing a formal complaint against Victor. The evidence was overwhelming, clear admissions of unethical practices, intent to deceive, and his role in exploiting Evelyn's trust. Given the strength of our case, Daniel explained during a meeting with Mia and Evelyn, we can push for a fast-track court order to freeze Victor's accounts. If we succeed, we'll stop him from accessing any of your assets while we pursue legal restitution. Evelyn nodded, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Do you think it will work? Daniel smiled reassuringly. We've got a strong case. The courts take fraud seriously, especially with evidence this compelling. As the legal wheels began to turn, the emotional weight of the ordeal started to show. Evelyn, usually composed, found herself plagued by guilt. One evening, as she and Mia sat together in the dimly lit living room, Evelyn broke the silence. I should have seen it coming, she said softly, her voice trembling. I let him into our lives, and now we're fighting to fix my mistake. Mia placed a comforting hand on her mother-in-law's. You were trying to protect us, Evelyn. None of this is your fault. Evelyn shook her head. But it is. I should have been more cautious. Mia squeezed her hand gently. You trusted him because you have a good heart? That's not something to regret. And now we're stronger because we're facing this together. The words seemed to bring Evelyn some comfort. She smiled faintly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. You've been my rock through all of this, Mia. I don't know what I'd do without you. The days that followed were filled with meetings, court filings, and strategy sessions. The legal process was grueling, but Mia and Evelyn faced it with unwavering determination. With each step forward, their bond grew stronger, forged in the fire of their shared struggle. Mia, who had initially been reluctant to confront Victor, now found herself driven by a sense of justice, not just for Evelyn, but for herself. She realized how much she had grown through the ordeal, finding strength she didn't know she possessed. Evelyn, too, began to heal. Though the experience had shaken her, it also reminded her of the resilience she and Mia shared. Together, they found solace in small victories. The court's agreement to freeze Victor's accounts, the progress made in reclaiming their stolen assets, and the growing support from friends like Margaret. Several weeks later, they faced Victor in court. Daniel presented the evidence with precision, playing the damning footage for the judge. The room was tense as Victor's slick demeanor crumbled under the weight of his recorded words. When it was Evelyn's turn to testify, she spoke with quiet dignity. I trusted Mr. Victor because I wanted to secure my family's future, she said. But he betrayed that trust. Today, I'm here to ensure he doesn't do this to anyone else. Victor's defense faltered, unable to counter the overwhelming evidence. The judge ruled in Evelyn's favor, nullifying the fraudulent trust and ordering Victor to return all assets immediately. As the court proceedings concluded, Evelyn and Mia stood outside the courthouse, the weight of the past few months finally lifting. Evelyn turned to Mia, her eyes filled with gratitude. We did it. Mia smiled, her heart swelling with pride. You were amazing in there. Evelyn chuckled softly. I couldn't have done it without you. And without Daniel, Margaret, and everyone who stood by us. Their victory wasn't just about reclaiming the lost assets. It was a testament to their resilience and the strength of their bond. They had faced betrayal, loss, and uncertainty, but together, they had emerged stronger. The days following their victory in court were filled with a cautious sense of relief. Evelyn and Mia spent their time reorganizing their lives, sorting through the recovered assets, and planning how to move forward. The weight of their ordeal had lifted, but the emotional scars lingered. One evening, as Mia prepared dinner, she noticed Evelyn sitting quietly by the window, a faraway look in her eyes. A stack of old photographs lay on her lap, and she gently ran her fingers over one in particular, a picture of Mark. You've been quiet today, Mia said, placing 2 steaming plates on the table. Evelyn smiled faintly, setting the photos aside. Just reminiscing. It's been a long road, hasn't it? Mia nodded, sitting across from her. Too long. But we made it through. As they ate, Mia couldn't help but notice how little Evelyn touched her food. Her movement seemed slower, more deliberate. A faint cough interrupted their conversation, but Evelyn waved it off, her expression serene. "I'm fine," she said, sensing Mia's concern. "Probably just the change in weather." Over the next few days, Evelyn's energy seemed to wane. She would often retreat to her room earlier than usual, and Mia caught her rubbing her chest during moments of discomfort. The signs were subtle, but to Mia, they were impossible to ignore. One afternoon, while sorting through some financial papers, Mia brought up her concerns. "Evelyn, you've been pushing yourself too hard. Maybe we should schedule a checkup." Evelyn dismissed the idea with a wave of her hand. "I've been through worse, Mia. I just need a bit of rest." But Mia's worry only grew. That evening, she spoke with Daniel, seeking advice. "She's trying to brush it off, but I can see she's not well," Mia confided. Daniel's voice was calm but firm. "You've both been through a lot. Stress can take a toll. But if you think it's more serious, don't wait. Get her to a doctor." Despite her declining health, Evelyn seemed determined to cherish every moment. She spent long afternoons with Mia, sharing stories of her youth and reminiscing about Mark. They laughed over old memories, revisited photo albums, and even started planning a small trip to the countryside, something Evelyn had always wanted to do. One evening, as they sat together on the couch, Evelyn placed her hand over Mia's. "You've been my anchor, Mia. I want you to know how proud Mark would have been of you." Mia's eyes filled with tears. "I wouldn't have made it through without you, Evelyn. You've been my family, my strength." Evelyn's smile was warm but tinged with a quiet resignation. "Promise me you'll keep moving forward, no matter what." Mia nodded, her throat tight. "I promise." It happened on a quiet morning. Mia was in the kitchen making tea when she heard a sudden thud from the living room. She rushed in to find Evelyn slumped on the floor, her breathing shallow and labored. "Evelyn!" Mia cried, dropping to her knees. Panic surged through her as she grabbed her phone and called for an ambulance. As they waited, Evelyn's eyes fluttered open, her face pale. "I'm sorry, Mia," she whispered. "I didn't want you to worry." "Don't talk like that," Mia said, her voice shaking. "You're going to be okay." The ambulance arrived moments later, and the paramedics quickly assessed Evelyn's condition. As they loaded her onto the stretcher, Mia clung to her hand, tears streaming down her face. "I'm right here," she whispered. "I'm not leaving you." The hospital room was silent except for the steady beeping of the heart monitor. Mia sat by Evelyn's bedside, holding her hand tightly. The doctors had confirmed what Mia feared. Evelyn's condition had deteriorated rapidly. She was suffering from advanced heart failure, likely exacerbated by the immense stress of the past few months. Evelyn's eyes fluttered open, and she gave Mia a weak smile. "You're still here?" "Of course I am," Mia said, brushing a strand of hair from Evelyn's forehead. "I'm not going anywhere." Evelyn's gaze softened. "Mia, there's something I've been meaning to tell you." Mia leaned in, her heart pounding. "What is it?" Evelyn's voice was faint but steady. "All this time, I've been trying to make things right. Not just for Mark, but for you. I wanted you to have the security and freedom to live your life fully." Mia squeezed her hand. "You've done more for me than I could ever repay." Evelyn smiled weakly. "You've repaid me by being here, by fighting alongside me. But there's one last thing I need to say." Evelyn's breath grew labored, and the monitor's beeping slowed. Mia's tears spilled freely as she whispered, "I'm here, Evelyn. You're not alone." "I'm proud of you," Evelyn said, her voice barely audible. "And I love you, Mia. You're my family." Mia nodded, her chest tightening with grief. "I love you too." As Evelyn's eyes closed, a peaceful expression settled on her face. The monitor emitted a long, steady beep, signaling her passing. Mia clung to Evelyn's hand, her sobs breaking the silence. Hours later, Mia sat in the hospital's quiet lounge, staring at the sunrise through the large windows. Her heart was heavy, but amidst the sorrow, there was a sense of gratitude. Evelyn's final moments had been filled with love and closure. Daniel arrived shortly after, offering his condolences. "She was an incredible woman," he said softly. Mia nodded. "She was. And she left me with so much memories, strength, and a family that I didn't think I could find again." Daniel placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You'll carry her legacy forward." Mia took a deep breath, the first rays of dawn bringing a sense of renewal. "I will." A week had passed since Evelyn's funeral, and the apartment felt emptier without her presence. Yet, amidst the grief, Mia found herself drawn to the strength Evelyn had shown even in her final days. As Mia sorted through Evelyn's belongings, she stumbled upon a sealed envelope marked with her name in Evelyn's delicate handwriting. Opening it, Mia discovered Evelyn's will. In it, Evelyn had left everything to Mia: the apartment, the savings, and even a small countryside property Evelyn had purchased years ago but never mentioned. Evelyn's words, written in her usual graceful style, brought tears to Mia's eyes.
My dearest Mia. If you're reading this, it means I'm no longer by your side. I want you to know how much you've meant to me. You've been my rock, my family, and the light that kept me going after Mark's passing. I've left you everything, not because of what we've been through, but because I trust you to carry our family's legacy forward. Use it to build the life you deserve, to chase your dreams, and to create new memories. Know that I'll always be with you, watching over you with pride and love. Yours always, Evelyn.
Mia clutched the letter, tears streaming down her face. Evelyn's selflessness and love had not only safeguarded her future, but also left her with an enduring sense of purpose. In the days that followed, Mia began to make plans, not just for herself but to honor Evelyn's memory. She decided to visit the countryside property Evelyn had spoken of fondly in her stories. It would be a place of reflection, a sanctuary where she could heal and continue building the life Evelyn had wished for her. As Mia stood on the balcony of their apartment one last time, she felt a quiet sense of peace. Evelyn's love and sacrifices had given her a new beginning, and Mia was ready to embrace it. "I'll make you proud, Evelyn," she whispered, looking up at the sky. The future was uncertain, but Mia carried Evelyn's strength and love with her, a guiding light as she stepped into the next chapter of her life. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who might need a reminder of the power of love, resilience, and family. Let Evelyn and Mia's journey inspire others to cherish their loved ones and face life's challenges with courage. What did you think of this story? Have you ever experienced a moment where love and sacrifice changed your life? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to follow for more heartwarming stories that remind us of life's most precious moments.